Thank you very much, Ana Paula. Zoe, could you also answer the question?
So I guess your first question was, how did this project come about? How did, I think it's kind of an well, maybe it's interesting to other people just as a good example of how long things can take in the English language publishing world. I first read this book, I want to say in like 2012 or 2013. And I loved it immediately. And I think I contacted Ana Paula on Facebook just to tell her that I liked it and I was interested in doing a sample. And then the next year, 2014, there was the British Council did, they called it a winter school that was in Parachi. It was like the week before the Flip International Literary Festival. And so there were two groups of translators. There was a group of us working from Portuguese into English, and then there was a group working from English into Portuguese. And we worked separately in our rooms every morning. We had an author in the room and then also a workshop leader. But then we also all brought pieces that we were working on to workshop together in the afternoon. And so this is the sample that I brought to workshop there. And I remember it was interesting because a lot of the Brazilian translators who were there hadn't read the book and didn't know anything about the book. Even the author who was in our room, Zé Luís Passos, he was like, oh, I've never read her stuff, but I really want to read it, so I'm glad that you brought the sample. So I workshopped it and then kind of pitched it a little bit, didn't get very far with that. And then 10 years later, it came out in English. So yeah, it takes a long time. I don't think that Charco saw any sample that I did. I actually don't think that they look at samples much. I think they asked another translator if he was interested in doing it, and he had been in the room with us when I workshopped that sample and remembered it and told them to talk to me. So that's how that came about.
And what about research, Zoe? I mean, in terms of how much research did you have to do and the challenges?
Yeah.
Challenges.
This was one of the, I mean, it sounds strange to say this just given the content of the book, but it was really one of the most enjoyable translations that I've worked on. I felt really comfortable in this world, and I'll explain why. So I grew up in rural Appalachia, southeastern Kentucky. I grew up in the woods. I grew up in a family that there was hunting, subsistence farming, like I feel very comfortable translating stories from rural people, and I think rural people are really similar everywhere in the world. The other thing is my mother-in-law in Brazil, she grew up on a dairy farm in the interior of São Paulo state. It's no longer a working dairy farm, but they do raise cattle to then sell to cattle farmer, like beef farming producers. So at least once a year I'm on that farm and hanging out with guys and who remind me, not saying that they murdered anyone, but that remind me of these characters of Cattle and Men. So in terms of research, it was just sort of thinking about like, oh, how would my grandfather talk with his friends about things like this? Or the guys at the farm who raise the cattle, like what kinds of things would they say? Like, how would they act? So I always kind of had that image in my head when I was translating it.
It wasn't, in terms of challenges, the vocabulary wasn't a problem, or what was, can you remember any sort of challenge?
I mean, I did a lot of research. I mean, translators joke about if they die and people look at their internet search history. I looked up so much information and downloaded so many documents, like detailed, like I even had like architectural plans for a slaughterhouse. So I could see like the floor plan and how everything was laid out and what rooms they did what in. So I did a lot of research about just the industry, like the meat industry in the US and in the UK. Yeah, so there's a lot of gory search history for a while.